We are so excited today because our leader in residence at Columbia Law School, Miss Hilary Crane, who most of you might be in class with, has brought her executive team to talk about their effective leadership styles, how they work together, and how they create this awesome culture at Nike. And without further ado, I'm actually going to go ahead and pass it over to our moderator for this afternoon, Mr. Adam Bryant. Adam Bryant is the managing director of Merrick & Company, which is a senior executive consulting firm. He is also a New York Times award-winning journalist. He created the Corner Office, where he interviewed over 500 CEOs on their effective leadership styles and how that imparts a strong organizational culture. He has 2 books on this subject, so if you were lucky enough to read them, they're amazing. But he's also the Reuben Mark Senior Advisor for this initiative, and we're so happy to have him. And thank you all for being here today. They all just flew in, so we're going to give them a big round of applause and go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Hilary. Olivia, I'm sorry. Thank you, Hilary. Thank you all for coming. I am very ambitious for our time together. I want to cover a lot of ground. I do want to jump right in rather than doing dramatic readings of bios and things like that. But the first question on everybody's mind is, who is the fastest runner on the team?
Rob.
Yeah, Rob.
For how long? What distance? Yeah, right.
How fast is your mile?
Probably less than it was before, but I'd say I'm still in the 7-minute mile
All right.
range, and I have a 2:58 marathon time.
Wow. Wow. Very impressive. Okay, so if just kind of a lightning round format, if we can go up and down the line, starting with you, Anne, just your name, title, kind of a brief synopsis of what you do, what your role is, and then if you can share with the audience something, kind of memo to self of something that you have learned in your career that you didn't know when you were younger and in law school or business school, as the case may be.
Sure, thanks. My name's Ann Miller. I am the corporate secretary and chief ethics and compliance officer. I've been at Nike almost 13 years. In my role, part of what I do is partner, obviously, with lots of different people as it relates to all governance matters. So public company filings, board-related matters, and then also on all compliance related matters with a focus on anti-bribery and anti-corruption. The one thing I've learned, which I knew before starting the job, I just hoped I wouldn't have to exercise it so much, is resilience. Recognize that along the way there's a lot of tough journeys and that you will make mistakes, and it's not making the mistakes, it's how you respond to them. And to always be curious and continue to learn and to grow and to just stay after it. Put your head down and do good work.
You may get more opportunities at that than most, but.
My name is Sean OHalloran, and I head our government and public affairs. And I think basically we are translators in between the language of Nike and the language of different governments, and trying to figure out how we can talk to each other and communicate. But and I would say that there is a dynamic tension between business and government naturally, and all business is touched by government in some way, shape, or form, and so it's how we craft that relationship, those relationships around the world. I would say that there are a lot of variables, and we have to understand that a lot of them we don't control or influence, and it's really a matter of how we get our company to chart a path through them, and how we can take things that we don't control, like weather and war, and still be successful around the world. But and then figuring out how we influence those variables that we can be a part of. So it's a big part of it. But disruptive forces are pretty much a given.
And your biggest lesson you've learned?
I'd say biggest lesson is to be nimble. Don't be complacent with the status quo. That things are constantly changing, and that you try to minimize the surprises, but there are always going to be things that you don't anticipate, and just trying to be prepared for those things.
Good afternoon. My name is Colin Graham, and I am the Geographies and Global Marketplace Counsel. What that means is that I lead numerous teams, many of them based overseas. As a European legal team, China legal team, Asia Pacific legal team, a Latin America legal team. So they're all my responsibility as well. We have a separate legal team based in Boston with the Converse organization. Nike owns Converse. I've got responsibilities there. And back at World Headquarters in Oregon, I've got other legal teams, brand marketing, privacy, Nike technology, and I also am responsible for the strategy, financial, and ops organization, which supports Hilary's entire organization, led by one of my colleagues who's sitting a couple of rows there. I think the biggest lesson that I've learned is just the importance of relationships. You can be a fantastic lawyer, but you'll get nowhere in a corporate in-house environment unless you are able to build strong relationships with your business partners. That's not always easy. You've got to be open, you've got to be approachable, you've got to be responsive, but you've also got to maintain some level of independence. That means that your advice is listened to and taken seriously. And I was taught nothing about the importance of building relationships when I was at law school many years ago.
Great, thank you. Margo.
Hello, my name is Margo Fowler. I'm the Chief Intellectual Property IP Officer at Nike, so it involves the typical trademark, patent, we have IP litigation, we have brand protection, which is anti-counterfeiting. Also part of that role is sports marketing on the legal side, and Colin and I share reporting over brand marketing. So it's a lot of the consumer-facing work that we do a lot of consumer-facing work. So the biggest lesson, kind of trying to pick something different than the team, the importance of, or the difference between activity and impact. That just being busy and hardworking is really not enough. You have to be impactful. I'm just reminded of one example from my world on the brand protection side. We don't want to seize an anti-counterfeiting. We don't want to seize like 1 million socks in the Sahara. We want to, or dog collars with the swoosh on it. But we want to, even take 5,000 World Cup jerseys right outside of, at the Paris Stadium. So that's one of the key lessons I've learned.
Hi, I'm Rob Linewan, Chief Litigation Counsel. First, I think it's amazing that you have this program here, and I wish I had something similar when I was in law school. My job is all commercial litigation, also some IP litigation, sports marketing litigation, government investigations. I run the global employment law team, and I also have the honor of running our resilience organization, which includes global event security and business continuity and the like. I think the biggest lesson I've learned is that you can be an incredible lawyer, but this job is not just about lawyering. And so you can be right on the law and wrong on where you're going. And so there's more than just thinking about whether I'm going to win or lose a case or whether my legal argument is right or wrong. And I think in order to make those decisions, the second thing is you got to listen to other people. Lawyers have a problem with that. And if you could learn in law school to know that it doesn't matter if you're the smartest person in the room, you have to listen to other people. And we have one of our outside counsel who's actually a alumni sitting up there. And it provides me with great advice a lot of times. So, I think it's really important to make sure you're listening to other people.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jorge Casimiro. I am Nike's Chief Social and Community Impact Officer. And what that means is I lead a fantastic team across the world who works to make the world a better place through the power of sport. And this is part of our purpose offense across what we do with environmental sustainability, diversity and inclusion, and our social and community impact work. I did not go to law school nor business school, so this is rarefied air. I was at West Point yesterday, and I was not in the military either, so this is a really interesting week for me. What I would say in terms of lessons, and I'm going to share two. One is similar to something Rob was saying, is that not everyone thinks the same way that I do. And whether it's relationships, whether it's listening, that the way people process information or the way people intake information or what considerations they have are going to be different. And then the second, more to the leadership piece of it, is it's going to sound trite because it's something that I probably learned as a child that just didn't listen to it, was being authentic. I think authenticity plays such a large role in leadership and in day-to-day. And it's something that we forget at some point when we start our careers because we're trying to be like that person or that person. And that's both good and bad because it slips in as opposed to learning from those lessons and incorporating it into your authentic style.
Hi, I'm Hilary Crane. It's my distinct privilege to lead the team of all of these people. I'm the Chief Administrative Officer and General Counsel at Nike. And in addition to these great people, other really crucial members of my team are also here, and I want to introduce them. I have my HR leader who teams with all of us. That's Stephanie over there. And then sitting next to her, we have Terry, and she runs strategy and operations for the whole department. And next to her is the person who makes my life possible and keeps this team running, my executive assistant, Jenny. Who's probably, I think we would all agree, the most important player in this whole organization. What I would leave you with that I really didn't understand at the beginning is that the power is entirely in the team. Your career is going to be about who you choose to surround yourself with, and that can be on the good and the bad in a law firm or in a company. So take real care with that. It matters. The other thing I would also say is don't be afraid to have people who are smarter than you as part of your team. They don't make you look worse, they make you look better. So don't be afraid of that. Sometimes you see in business people who are reluctant to have super powerful people around them for fear it'll diminish them. I have found uniformly that it's the opposite. And so I'm humbled every day to have these guys.
Thank you, and great tee up for the next question. So in my firm, we do a lot of work with leadership teams at the C-suite level at sort of Fortune 200 companies. One of the things that we encounter, and you will encounter in your careers, is that there are a lot of leadership teams that are teams in name only. They call themselves a team, but they don't act like a team. The little time that I've spent with all of you guys on the phone and in person, you guys seem like a real team. I also heard a startling statistic. You guys have been together as a team for 5, 6, 7 years?
Yeah.
So you are a rarity. And as Hilary said, that is in many ways going to drive the experience of your jobs in your career. You can have ideas of like the title you want, the company you want to work for, but your day-to-day experience of how much you like your job is going to depend on the function or the dysfunction of the team, which leads to an obvious question. How do you set the tone for the team? How did you learn to build your framework for how to lead a team?
So the honest answer to that is with difficulty and by trial and error. You know, this team has been together, this exact group, for a long time, but in the time I've been at Nike, we've had other members of this team, and they were absolutely excellent as individuals, but we did not have the team dynamic that we have now. For one reason or another, there was chafing or it just didn't work. And I couldn't really put my finger on why, but you could tell. And what's really important is to not overlook those things and pretend things are working when they're not, and try to move yourself to a place where it feels really good. And what I would say about this team is we really, truly trust each other. We don't go at things alone. We go at things together. I almost never hear, I can't remember the last time I heard among this team that it was like, well, it went that way because X, Y, or Z didn't include me in the decision. We're extraordinarily inclusive. we also value diversity, and I don't mean that by the typical numbers. I mean, it's diversity of thought. Jorge's not a lawyer, but he questions us sometimes when we're talking about talent that's legal talent by just the language we're using and what he knows about those people. So you can't pigeonhole. Everybody has a role to play, both as the specialist in the thing they're great at and as a generalist across doing the work that we all do as a collective.
And, you know, a team is really formed and its true character comes out during the tough times. So I'd love to hear from, you know, how do you guys work through the turbulence? You know, whether it's with each other or a tough issue or you're taking, you know, fire from all sides?
You know, no turbulence at Nike. It's really
That was going to be my answer. What
super
turbulence?
Smooth sailing.
Yeah, so jump in, Rob.
So I handle a lot of the turbulent issues. And I could say that the one way we do it is one, I think we all sort of care about each other and we go in and we bounce ideas off each other. The other thing is I think we approach it with somewhat of a sense of humor. We know that, you know, the situations that we're dealing with are serious. We know they have great implications for the company, but we also know that, you know, we are dealing with each other as human beings. And we respect each other, and I think we are able to take those tough situations and work through them. The other thing is we have serious debates about what we should do, and that means you have to debate the boss, and you have to, and the boss has to be able to accept that. And you know, and it was even on one of my performance reviews about how much the boss respects the fact that we go at it tooth and nail sometimes over issues. But we always, and it's not like that in every other group, and we always come to a better decision because we're able to have those discussions, not take them personally, and exit with a better idea of what we should do.
I also think that we don't take the sky is falling approach to things. I mean, it really is, there's turbulence like every single day, it feels like, and it's rare that somebody comes in with panic. It's more, it's like a measured way of looking at things, and I think that helps both the issues and also the dynamic.
Yeah, I get the more emotional side of it, which is the political side, and I think it manifests itself into policy. So it's the front end of the lawmaking, right? It's the laws being made, and I think that one of the other learnings is that Nike is very engaged on social issues, and that our consumers, our employees expect us to have a point of view on issues that are very much in the public eye, and that it's also important to I think one of my learnings is also that you cannot take a U.S. lens and apply it uniformly around the world, and it's important to embrace how other cultures do business, how they think, how their political operations work, how their governments work, how business works in other countries. We are a U.S. incorporated company, but we are a global brand, and I think the cultural sensitivity is critically important to our success globally.
So let's go a little deeper on this. I mean, Hilary, obviously you think long and hard about team dynamics and making sure it works. If you were interviewing me for a job to potentially join your team, and you wanted to make sure that I was going to fit into this group, assume I'm competent, sort of table stakes of the actual job. What questions are you going to be asking me? What's the framework in your head for thinking, is this guy going to fit on the team? Because if he doesn't fit on the team, the antibodies are going to reject me pretty quickly, right?
Yeah, we do call that organ rejection, and we have a fair amount of it at the company and even in our department. It's less about the specific question that I would ask you and more about the nature of our dynamic. The team can talk about this. I'd probably tease you a little bit and see if you could handle it. I'd have you say something and I'd disagree kind of vehemently and see if you were just dove in to agree with me and paper it over, or whether you would engage and have the conversation. I would more test real-time live for the dynamic that makes this team work, and those are keys to those dynamics. That's not true on every team, but that's my personality, and it's this team's personality. And you can tell pretty quickly whether somebody's going to be uncomfortable standing up to you. And in my role, you know, to Rob's point, it's death if people don't tell you when you're wrong. Like, if everybody just runs around here telling me my idea is right, Nike would be in a heap of trouble. So I kind of use those in the moment pushes to see how people respond.
I think the other thing we do is more than one person will interview you, right? So you get the perspective from others, and we've all been in positions where one of us have been on an interviewer for a candidate in someone else's team to get that insight from other subject matter experts.
Okay. And quick question, Hilary, if I could make you invisible and then send you into leadership team meetings at other companies, so that you could watch them in action, what are the key poker tells for you about whether the team is a high-functioning team or not?
So actually, I'd be looking more at the dynamic before the meeting starts and immediate after the meeting ends. Are these people enjoying each other's company? Are they innately like gathering and saying, I'm struggling with this, what do you think? Or is it more formal? Because it's in those informal moments that you really see how people are gelling together, and you get a sense about how they're going to interact. This goes back to diversity. We have different people on this team. Colin, I would say, is our kind of emotional leader. He's very dry, but he travels the world, and he's very compassionate. Some of the other teammates who will go unnamed have a little bit more of an acerbic edge and use their elbows more. And all of that's good. We need all of it. We need the brainiacs, and we need the people who are practical. And so I'd be looking for the balance and for the comfort level. I mean, trust is all. The class I'm teaching is called Becoming a Trusted Advisor. It's not just about, the general counsel to the CEO. You can't be trusted unless you trust. And I trust these people with my life, and they trust each other, and that's what makes us successful. So I'd be looking for those indicia.
That's great, and I want to hear from everybody else. So the tee-up is this. If all of you are ambitious, you wouldn't be here if you weren't. Some of you may have aspirations to just be sole contributors, lone wolves in your jobs, in your careers. But if you are ambitious, you may likely be leading teams yourselves. So I want to hear from the other group, because all of you lead teams, correct? Yeah. Okay, so what is your lesson? Maybe you've learned it from Hilary and your own group that you're taking it to your own work, but what is your best insight on how to run an effective team? Anne?
Well, I think it does start with trust, and I think trust is built when you are vulnerable. So, in my latest role with my team, one of the things I go into, I'm not a subject matter expert in all of the areas that I manage. So acknowledging that I may not be the best supply chain lawyer, but I have Josh, who is this amazing supply chain lawyer. So I talked to him about, I'm not going to help you with the technical law, but I can help you with communication. I can help make sure the right stakeholders are involved. If there's roadblocks in the way, I can help remove them for you. So on the non-legal side, that's where I can add value to Josh. On other areas where I may be a subject matter expert, I might lean in more on the technical side and maybe have less on some of the other softer skills. So I think it's about being vulnerable with your team, trying to be really honest, giving them fair, tough feedback, always in the spirit of helping them get better. I mean, there is nothing better than when your teammate shows up well. There is no better reflection of you, even if you just want to be self-interested about it, right? I look great when Josh looks great, and that feels great. And so I think being authentic, being connected, being vulnerable, those skills are things I'm not sure they didn't teach me when I was at law school, but I find it to be the most valuable skill that I bring. We're all going to be lawyers. The question is, will you be a leader? So I'd really encourage you, and this is so fantastic that you have this and sponsor it, because it's such a sort of underdeveloped skill that a lot of new lawyers have when they come out of law school.
I would echo that, but also just creating a vision for the team and also a state of constantly improving your own role in the function and learning from your team, and that you hire for experience and education, but you also want judgment and instinct, and you want their input, and understanding that so much of what we have to make decisions on is very subjective, right? You want their values. How do you see it? How do you view it? And really welcoming their input. And I think to Hilary's point, getting a team that's smarter and more capable than you in the field. And we kind of run a team of island nations, right? We have people scattered all around the globe. Some people are just one person embedded in an organization, but you've got to give them the latitude and you've got to trust them to carry the weight of the company and to represent the company, and to empower them to do their work and really just let them do it and let them feedback. And I think just be willing to constantly improve your own, the vision you're creating for the team.
Well, I had absolutely no aspirations towards leadership when I joined Nike 22 years ago. I'd spent quite a few years working in law firms in Scotland, and then, to my great surprise, I interviewed for and got a job at Nike's EMEA headquarters as the first sports marketing attorney for that part of the world. So I thought I'd landed my dream job. And when I joined Nike, I thought, if this is my future for the next 25 years, working on big soccer club deals and tennis player deals, and you name it, every sports category, I'd have been happy with that, I think. But we had a leader in Europe who was brought in from the outside, didn't work out, left. There was a lot of turbulence in the legal team. And I'd spent time, building relationships with my small group of peers in the European legal team. And I'd also, invested time in building relationships back at world headquarters. And so I was given the opportunity to assume leadership of the European legal team. And I then got the opportunity, 15 years later, to move to world headquarters to lead up the emerging markets legal team at the time. That was a fantastic job. That was adding lawyers to important markets for Nike where we hadn't had legal representation before. And I echo what Hilary said. I was looking for people that smarter than I am, better lawyers, but also really good people. And I succeeded in that task. I built a fantastic legal team. So I always look to bring in people who are smarter than I am, or promote people who are smarter than I am. And I take, just immense pleasure in seeing people succeed and grow within the company. Some of the people I've recruited, one or two people, have moved into other functions. So I really take enormous pleasure from the success of the team. I was always open to moves. I did make it known that I was available for opportunities, wherever they might lie. So that's an important part, I think, of success on our team, being open to take on new challenges. So I think that's all I've got to say on that at the moment.
Margaret.
So on team, I've had the pleasure of doing a lot of different roles over the years and had different teams. And sometimes you inherit a team, and so sometimes one of the first things you have to do is kind of assess the talent and whether everybody is right to be there. And to me, usually that's kind of the first thing. But then once everybody's should be there, to me it's very much about really knowing everybody individually, understanding their strengths, and using their strengths to the maximum advantage of everybody. I mean, there's just always, and I think that's part of what works here. We really do have different strengths that we employ. If you can really figure that out with your team and draw them in when they are doing their best, it usually feels good for everyone.
I guess the first thing I would say, I started out as a sole contributor I was our only employment lawyer for the entire globe for a short period of time until I convinced Nike that maybe with all these employees, we needed a team. And that worked out to our advantage. I mean, it's hard to give, Korean employment advice from Beaverton, Oregon. You actually need a Korean lawyer. So it's knowing the areas where you need other people to fill in with their talents, I think is important. I also think it's really important to be available for people to come in your office and bounce questions off you, and you have to make time for them. The third thing I think is, you're all going to be very well educated when you leave here from business school and law school. You're all very smart. Do not be a jerk. You're going to go to law firms, you're going to go to business, they're going to tell you you're going to have great success, and that can go to your head. You cannot be a jerk. It'll eventually come back on you. It'll come back on you from the associates in your firm, from the partners that you work with. It'll come back to you from your business partners, and they'll say, real smart, can't get along here, right? Real smart doesn't listen. Always has to be the smartest person in the room. If you can harness your competitive spirit and bring up your humanity when you're working with other people, I think it'll take you a long way.
I was going to say something similar, not as pointed maybe as the Chief Litigation Counsel for Nike Inc. But that would be that, there is no substitute for good human beings. There is no substitute for good human beings. And the argument that, oh, but this has this technical expertise, this subject matter expertise, but he's a jerk.
Don't point at me.
You can find somebody else, especially when you work for a place like Nike. We attract incredible talent. So there's no substitute for that. In terms of leadership too, I'd say two other points. One is you gotta let go of control. So whether that's being vulnerable, you can't control it all. I may not be a lawyer, I'm married to a lawyer, I'm surrounded by lawyers. I know it's about control. And it's about saying, hey, here are the guardrails, and helping advise and counsel, what's the objective, what's the business decision you're trying to drive toward, and then let people make the decisions within those guardrails. And then the third point that I would say is when it comes to leadership, there's the leadership of the team, there's the leadership across, whether it's this team or across the enterprise that Hilary was alluding to, but also make time, we've touched on it, on people development. That takes time. That takes effort. That needs to be blocked on your calendars. You need to prepare for that. You need to prepare to have the tough conversation, the feedback conversation. You can't just go into it. And I think a lot of times, we are strapped for time, and that's the one that gets the least amount of attention. And we think, oh, I know this person, I know how she did this year, I know what her weaknesses are, and then you go into the conversation. Well, you haven't prepared for it. So the way that it comes across is not constructive and is not actually helping them develop.
I'd just like to jump in and touch on a couple of things that were raised and by both what Jorge just said and by what Margot said, and I don't want to drive by it. There's a concept called managing with courage. And that means having to call the question when people are underperforming. And it's our collective approach is to find people's strengths and work for them and try to develop them and help them get to their maximum potential and hope that they can succeed in the job. But you don't always succeed at that. And it's really easy to want to avoid it. Having hard conversations is hard. And yet, when you do avoid it and you don't manage with courage, you allow somebody to stay on the team who's not either pulling their own weight or for an emotional or being a jerk reason. They're otherwise pulling the whole team down, and it's really easy as a team leader to just want to avoid that. And it's terrible because it's so unfair to everybody else on the team. So we all, every single one of us, a lot of our time together is spent, one-on-one talking about where it's not working and how we can collectively try to pull the person up and when we're going to call the question. And it's not a pleasant thing to talk about. It's not really a pleasant thing to do. It is completely and utterly essential to have a well-functioning team.
That's right. Great insights. So let's take the conversation up to slightly higher altitude. What is the role of the General Counsel's office in conversations around culture and organizational character? So the frame up for this is, for a lot of people for a very long time, culture was a nice to have conversation. It was not a need to have conversation. But as the headlines roll in from whether it's Wells Fargo or Volkswagen or WeWork recently, there are many others, companies, there's now headline risk around headlines. And let's just say it, Nike's had a few itself. So a lot of the times the culture conversation falls to the CEO, maybe the chief human resource officer. So again, my question, what is your role in those conversations?
So every person in every company, but certainly every leader in every company has responsibility for culture, full stop. Anybody who thinks that HR is responsible for culture is working in an organization that probably doesn't have a very good one, okay? We all own it. So that means culture is really how the people show up every day and comport themselves. So I think we lead by example in many ways. We also, because of where we sit, we see across the company. So we can see where there's disconnects between one side of the business and the other side of the business, and identifying those and figuring out constructive ways to help resolve them helps elevate the culture of the business so that it can be more like the culture of this team. And then I'll also say this, and I think some of my team has said this before, legality is often the least important topic in any conversation. It's gotta be about, is it right? Does it feel right? Not just at a moral level, but at a culture and team level. Does it reflect who we wanna be as a company and the willingness to call it when it doesn't, even if calling it can create some legal risk? Getting the culture right, I mean, we're not gonna avoid this topic. We very publicly had a cultural issue arise a year ago in the time of the Me Too movement. I wanna rush to say we had no aggressive behavior where people were sexually harassing other people in the traditional sense of that time, but we did find that there were pockets in the business where women in particular were feeling like they couldn't make their voices heard or their careers weren't being attended to. And the legally most protective thing to do, I don't think anybody in that group had a legit claim, could have been to slide by it, because pulling it out publicly, for sure you were gonna pull a class action. And we did pull a class action, so we've got a big piece of litigation Rob's handling. I'd take it 10 times over, because we lived up to our values and we said this is not how we want it to be. So there has to be that moment when you say, yeah, there's some legal risk here, but that's like the third order concern, not the first order concern. And I think we all behave that way, both on the big macro issues like the one I just discussed and on the smaller ones that come up every day. We'll also sometimes call other people about being jerks. You know?
And I think to that point where it's not just about the legalities of it, if you look at culture, there are more than 400 vice presidents across Nike. There are only 9 that are Latino or Latina. 9. There's nothing illegal about that. It is a chink in the armor, for sure. And in terms of leading by example, I've got 3 small kids. I've got a busy job. I've got a demanding boss. I've got all of these things. At the same time, I said, all right, I will step up. I'll be the executive sponsor for our Latino Employee Resource Group to help to attract and retain and develop and promote Latino and Latina talent at Nike. And then silver lining, which is interesting because I'm sitting next to the Chief Litigation Counsel. Silver lining, of those 9 Latinos at Nike that are vice presidents, 5 are Latina. So we actually have more female Hispanic vice presidents than male. So it's like there are bright spots, look for them, don't wallow in the negativity behind it, and then look for the opportunity to keep moving forward.
Okay, I want to have a 2-hour discussion in the next 5 minutes because I want to give you guys some time for questions. Go to even higher altitude. What is the role of corporations in society today in terms of setting policy on social issues, taking a stance? Their employees expect them to do it more. Their customers expect them to do it more. A lot of people say Washington isn't doing it more. Colin Kaepernick, what is the role of companies today?
Well, yeah, and the team will tell you this, that's a multi-hour conversation. When the Business Roundtable came out with their recent comment about the purpose of the team, Ann will tell you, like, literally at midnight, I'm sending law review articles to the team.
She wouldn't stop. It was not healthy.
It wasn't. I'm still going, and the people in my class know it's a huge, important issue. It's lucky for me and for Nike that our corporate values and the history that we inherited from our founder was to not shy away from social issues. Some of it started in bad ways because of the labor issues that the company suffered in the late 90s, forced them into that conversation. And some of them started from great ways in terms of support for Title IX when that was just at an incipient moment. So for us, it comes really naturally. We've always believed that serving our stakeholders is serving our shareholder. We have our largest shareholder is alive and sits at our board table, and he was the one who has always pushed us to think about the stakeholders. So without going all the way down the rabbit hole, I'll tell you I didn't think the Business Roundtable needed to say what it said because I don't think you have to change the fundamentals of how you think about corporate law to make stakeholders relevant. Serving shareholders requires serving stakeholders. I also think, and this is my point of view now, I'm not speaking for Nike, this is just Hilary Crane. I think there's some danger in thinking that corporate leadership's a good substitute for national policy leadership. You know, Fortune 500 have 500 different CEOs and they turn over. And I don't share values with many of them, and I suspect you don't either. And I suspect not all of you would share values with me or my CEO. And so I think that way lies danger. We can't let our political system off the hook. And in saying that, obviously, because you see how we behave, we don't shy away from doing what we think is right. And I'd welcome other views from the team on this because it's something we think about. Sean?
I think on that point that, and obviously when there's a lot of volatility in the political environment, that understanding that what we stand for as a company and what we believe in and what we're committed to doesn't waver. We're committed to a 100% renewable energy in our sourcing, and we're committed to LGBT rights. And I think if you look at a myriad of issues where the political environment isn't necessarily aligned, what we stand for and what we believe in a company really doesn't waver. And I think you can look at examples of where companies flex their economic muscle to say, we don't want to expand our operations, we don't want to invest in an event in a culture where our employees and our customers are going to feel threatened or discriminated against. And I think you can look at South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, Indiana, where this was the case on a number of LGBT rights issues, where companies kind of said, hey, we're not going there. And so I think in the absence of public policy, companies have let their values show a little bit. Economically, forcing change and where governors would say, hey, we got to change this policy because it's economically going to hurt us. It's going to hurt us on jobs and events and investment, et cetera. So I just kind of add that, and it does play into the corporate culture. When we take positions on public policy, it helps shape our culture. And our values are reflected in that when we weigh in. And I think Kaepernick's probably an example of that.
I think one other comment, which is when you take positions socially, sometimes you have to understand that a corporation is so large and there are so many people working for it that sometimes there are going to be individual actions that are taken that are not consistent with those values. There will be lawsuits filed. There'll be public statements made, and sometimes articles written in the press that are not entirely true. And, you know, I've been lucky to be with this company that continues to focus on its values. And sometimes we sit and have very difficult questions, and it's not whether or not we were legally correct, but it is, did we do anything wrong here? And I think, you know, we're very thoughtful about those issues. And sometimes when we have done something wrong, we go clean it up. And sometimes when we haven't done something wrong or the individual hasn't done something wrong, we will stand behind them. And that's sort of rare in corporate America, where sometimes when there's an allegation, you drop the person and walk away. Because that's the easiest thing for a company to do. And we don't do that, which makes my job very interesting. But it makes me proud to be part of this team that, you know, we have a company that does that. We have a company that stands behind it in the right way. And we also recognize sometimes when people misstep and go sideways.
The other thing I would add, just in terms of social policy and corporations' role, there's a lot wrong with the world today. There's a lot of different things that corporations could get involved in. And I think, you know, we also have to be true to ourselves, and back to the authenticity piece of it. We have made a statement that we stand around diversity and inclusion, environmental sustainability, getting kids moving through our community work, as I said before, part of our purpose offense. And so thinking about what are those policy areas that align to those areas, to those three, or something that directly impacts Nike, either our employees or our consumers, and use that as gating filters to think about, should we engage, should we not engage? Because if not, we run the risk of, you know, just having Nike sign on to every possible policy statement, CEO letter, and then you lose the value of the brand. And I think something that's special about working at a company like Nike is that it is a brand. We don't make widgets. You know, and when you work for a brand, you got to think about the brand value and the impact that that brand has and how it can amplify, either for the good or for the bad, the decisions that you make.
Great insights. Questions? Please. Sure.
Oh, there is. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for the amazing discussion. As I was looking at all of you, I really was wondering, is this the right team? Is this the right team? Because looking at the various buckets of issues that have come up, whether it's labor laws, it's, you know, supply chain issues, environmental issues, I wonder how is it that you keep an ear to the ground when you're looking at a constellation of, like, across 45 countries, over 70,000 employees? How is it that you pick up on something before it becomes the hashtag or the headline, in a time where supply chains are, you know, somewhat fragmented, and like you said, like, we can't think like the US because in other countries labor laws may not even be, you know, something that exist? Thank you.
So behind each person you see sitting up here is a team of really strong people behind them, distributed all around the world, who share our values. And so we use them as our sensing organization, and we don't get it right all the time, but we get it right a lot of the time. We also, on the particular labor front, have a lot of tools we use to make sure we're in the factories. We disclose wherever all of our factories are to encourage other people to bring things to our attention. So there's a lot of different tools you use, but I really want you to understand that every person you look at here has, you know, lots of people behind them all around the world who are diverse and are drawn to Nike because of our values and share them and help us with that very difficult task.
Yeah, just on the employment side, like I said, I was the only employment lawyer at Nike when I got there. and that is just untenable, right? And now there are people in China, Singapore, Europe, and so it's those people that sort of, and they're embedded in those organizations. They're part of the teams there, and they have a lot of responsibility. It's not, you know, I'm not answering all the questions. They really act on their own, and so it's really important as you develop as an executive or a lawyer that you let people operate in that way, and then the feedback of information comes back. But it's a global view that we get.
And I think the other dynamic is that it's not just the teams behind us, it's other parts of the company and the teams behind them. And being a heavily matrixed organization, you've got to be able to then connect with those individuals that might sit in human resources, might sit on a marketing team, might sit on a communications team, that have nothing to do with this team, but they're sensing that information and bringing it up as well.
This is where having really strong lawyers on the ground in your key markets is really important, because they're often the ones who have more institutional knowledge. They've been in role longer. So if an issue arises in China, they will know to loop in the comms person, the GM, and the appropriate people back at world headquarters. I don't get involved in the labor side or the manufacturing side. My lawyers tend to focus on the commercial issues, but they are very swift to make sure that business leaders on the ground are talking to the right people and connecting back to the right leaders at world headquarters. You don't have that if your legal department is too heavily centralized, which is why we have strong lawyers in all our key markets now, which is not the case when I joined Nike. That's been a fantastic development over the last 20 years.
Great. Other questions? Yes.
I want to thank you all for being here. The first thing I want to say is I noticed you all have really nice Nike shoes, so I wanted to point that out.
We're actually dressed up today. This is, yeah, for sure, Colin.
And I also noticed you have a Just Do It shirt on, so I want to know how you all implement Nike's slogan into the work that you do, either professionally or personally.
Can I hit this? Yeah. Well, one thing.
You're wearing a shirt.
Yeah, it's my shirt. One thing that I played sports growing up. I love sports. I identify with the brand. And at Nike, everything is through our maxims, through our slogans, and through sports metaphors. And so that is just another way to connect with our business, to connect with each other. You know, we'll go into meetings and say like, well, it's a jump ball. And everyone gets it, so it's a different language that we use. But I think it is a way to stay grounded and to stay connected. And it's also a guide. I think as lawyers, you could say, just don't do it. Just wait, let's evaluate it, hold on. But I think you have to, it's part of our disposition. It actually is a cue to how we want to be aggressive, we want to be competitive. It is part of who we are. So that's how I see it show up.
That's a great answer. Can we try and squeeze in one more question before we wrap up this side of the room? Yes.
Hi, I was wondering, among the different methods of collective decision making, by consensus, by voting, by consultation, what method have you found to work best for what kind of scenarios? Thank you.
Hilary
Cage
decides.
fighting.
Hilary decides.
Yeah.
So in fairness, we encourage lively debate. I'm a big believer in the marketplace of ideas. They'll all tell you that the least favorite words to come out of my mouth is help me understand why. And then they go, oh no, here we go. But you can't run a company on consensus. Doesn't happen. So we talk everything through, we duke it out, we bring in other people who aren't necessarily closely related to the issue to be a part of that fray with us. And then often, probably more often than not, we do generally find ourselves in agreement, but when we don't, I make the call because somebody's got to make the call. And that's my job. And I also want to point out that even when I don't make the call, because there's so much going on, like Colin said, he has empowered lawyers on the ground. These people are empowered. I view it as my job for all of them to understand. I take the bullets. I don't care whether I was in the conversation or not. If they make a call and it ends up being wrong and something bad happens, that was my responsibility. I put them in positions of power. I try to empower them, and then I let them go. And they're really fantastic, but not everything works out. And the only way this trust happens is if they know I don't blame them and they don't blame the people behind them. We don't play a blame game. We play as a team.
One of Hilary's favorite sayings is, "This is not a democracy." But she makes absolutely sure that every single voice in the room is heard. And that's the most important thing when it comes to the decision making.
And on occasion, you could change her mind.
On lots of occasions, you've changed my mind.
But I would also add that the company at large is in large part, a very consensus-driven company. And so a lot of times as the lawyers, our job is also to corral the consensus, figure out who should make the decision, and make sure that's happening. And we do that all the time, because otherwise it can become very inefficient and things can swirl. And we oftentimes, to use a sports metaphor, I feel like we have to reach in, grab the ball, and move it over the line.
And I think to that point, the challenge sometimes is the clarity on the decision maker, right? And in law, it might be easier. If it's a legal question, then your chief lawyer should make the decision on it. But there are so much, like we've talked about today, that is not a legal question. So identifying and using the counsel to say, who should be making this decision? Let's get clarity behind that, and then get the inputs and go through the process.
We could talk for 3 hours. Big Columbia, thank you. Round of applause.